"Hand my dad the keys," my husband said. He had no idea what it would cost him. "Hand my dad the keys." Those 6 words ended my marriage long before the divorce papers ever did. The strange part? I didn't argue. I didn't cry. And I definitely didn't reach for the keys sitting on the kitchen island. Because 3 days earlier, my attorney had looked me straight in the eye and said something that suddenly made perfect sense. "Claire, if Ethan or anyone in his family ever tries to claim this house, don't argue with them. Let them talk. Greedy people always reveal far more than they intend, and the law has a way of rewarding patience." At the time, I thought she was being overly cautious. Standing in my dream kitchen now, I realized she'd seen this moment long before I ever could. My husband smiled with the confidence of a man who believed victory was already his. Behind him, his father, Richard, wandered through my home as though he were inspecting a property he'd already purchased. His fingertips glided across the handcrafted oak bookshelves my late father had spent months building with his own hands. "This room will make the perfect office," Richard announced. "We'll turn the guest suite into Melissa's room when she visits, and your brother-in-law can take the upstairs bedroom. You'll get used to the new arrangement." He wasn't making suggestions. He was giving orders. The movers weren't even there yet, and he was already dividing up my parents' legacy. Neither of them noticed the tiny red light blinking on my phone beside the fruit bowl. Ever since my attorney's warning, I'd recorded every conversation involving Richard. Neither of them noticed my hands had stopped shaking. Most importantly, neither of them understood that every arrogant word leaving their mouths was becoming evidence that would eventually destroy everything they thought they'd won. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 41 years old, and until that afternoon, I believed a marriage was built on love, trust, and protecting each other. I couldn't have been more wrong. This house wasn't simply expensive real estate. It was 20 years of sacrifice. My father worked overtime as an electrician almost every weekend. My mother worked 2 jobs, often falling asleep at the kitchen table with bookkeeping spread around her. They skipped vacations, postponed retirement, and celebrated birthdays with homemade cakes because every extra dollar went toward securing one thing: my future. When they passed away within 18 months of each other, this home became the last piece of them I had left. Ethan knew exactly what this house meant to me. He held my hand at both funerals. He promised we'd honor my parents by filling this home with love. Looking back now, every comforting word feels carefully rehearsed. I wonder if he was simply waiting until the deed carried only my name. The warning signs had always been there. Richard suddenly started visiting every weekend. He criticized the landscaping, measured windows without asking, talked about replacing furniture, even joked that he'd finally found the perfect place to retire. Whenever I looked at Ethan, expecting him to shut it down, he'd only shrug. "Dad's excited," he'd say. "Don't make everything a problem." I wanted to believe him. Until that Saturday morning. They arrived without calling. Richard carried a leather notebook. Ethan carried a confidence I'd never seen before. Together, they walked from room to room discussing where Richard's belongings would go, laughing as though I weren't even standing there. By the time we reached the kitchen, my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear myself breathe. Finally, Ethan stopped beside the kitchen island, pointed at the key ring, looked me straight in the eye, and spoke with a cold certainty that sent a chill through my entire body. "Hand my dad the keys." I looked at the keys, then at the tiny red light still blinking on my phone. For the first time that morning, I almost smiled. The words hung in the air. "Hand my dad the keys." For a long moment, nobody moved. Richard stood there with his arms folded, wearing the smug smile of a man who believed the conversation was already over. Ethan watched me with quiet expectation, convinced I'd eventually give in like I always had whenever his father pushed too far. They expected tears. They expected an argument. Instead, I smiled. For the first time that morning, I wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that appears when someone finally stops fighting for a relationship they've already realized is already over. I picked up the keys from the counter, turning them slowly in my hand. Richard confidently stretched out his palm. That's better, he said. I knew you'd come to your senses. Paperwork doesn't keep families apart. I looked directly at him. These keys don't belong to you. His smile faltered. They don't even belong to Ethan. Now both men were staring at me. They belong to the only person my parents ever trusted with this house. Richard laughed. Oh, Claire, don't be ridiculous. You're married. What's yours is Ethan's, and what's Ethan's belongs to family. I gently placed the keys back on the island. No, I replied calmly. Not this house. Ethan let out an impatient sigh. Claire, stop playing games. I'm not. I reached into a kitchen drawer and removed the thick blue folder my attorney had told me never to let out of my sight. Richard rolled his eyes. More paperwork? That won't save you. Actually, I said, it's exactly what my parents spent years preparing. Because they feared this day might come. For the first time, neither man interrupted me. My father believed in trusting people, I continued quietly. But he believed even more in protecting the people he loved. I slid the folder across the granite countertop. Inside was a copy of the family trust. Ethan barely looked at it before pushing it aside. I don't care about legal documents. You should. Richard stepped forward, forcing a confident smile. A trust changes nothing. You're still his wife. It changes everything. The room fell silent. This house was never marital property. It has always belonged to my family's private trust. It was never yours. Ethan frowned. You're lying. I wish I were. Richard folded his arms even tighter. Then we'll add Ethan's name. I almost laughed. You can't. Watch me. I already did. Confusion spread across Ethan's face. What does that mean? I opened the folder to a page marked with bright yellow tabs. My attorney updated the trust protections the week we moved in. Richard's confidence finally began to crack. What protections? The kind that activate the moment someone tries to pressure me into giving away this property. Ethan stared at me. You're bluffing. Without another word, I reached over, picked up my phone from beside the fruit bowl, and turned the screen toward them. The red recording timer was still running. My attorney told me greedy people usually destroy themselves. I just needed to let them keep talking. Every demand, every threat, every word Richard and Ethan had spoken since walking through my front door had been captured. The color drained from Ethan's face. Richard looked at the phone, then back at me. For the first time since they arrived, neither of them had a single word to say. They thought the recording was my strongest weapon. They were wrong. It was only the evidence. The real problem waiting for them hadn't even begun. Richard was the first to break the silence. So you recorded us? He let out a short laugh, though it sounded far less confident than before. Congratulations, Claire. You recorded a family disagreement. That's hardly going to ruin anyone. No, I replied evenly. It won't. I slipped my phone into my pocket without taking my eyes off either of them. But what happened in this house today matters, far more than what's on that recording. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, his confidence beginning to fade. Claire, enough. Stop talking in riddles. Just tell us what you think is happening. I already am. I opened the blue folder one final time and removed a sealed envelope. My father didn't just leave me this house. Before he passed away, he spent weeks with our attorney preparing for every situation he could imagine. Richard folded his arms. Your father couldn't predict the future. No, I said quietly. But he understood greed. I slid the envelope across the kitchen island. Go ahead. Read it. Ethan hesitated before pulling out the document. The color slowly drained from his face as he read the first page. What is this? A document attached to our prenuptial agreement. I've never seen this before. You signed it. He looked again, searching the page more carefully. It's attached. I nodded. My father made sure that if anyone ever tried to pressure me into giving away my family's home, I'd never have to choose between protecting my marriage and protecting his life's work. Richard shook his head dismissively. That's not how the real world works. Our attorney believed it was. Ethan kept reading. His breathing became uneven. It says, his voice cracked. I finished the sentence for him. It says the moment. Someone tries to force me into giving away property protected by my family's trust. I have every legal right to protect myself and everything my parents built. Richard slammed his hand against the countertop. This is insane! No, I answered calmly. What's insane is walking into someone else's home and deciding who sleeps in which bedroom before you've even been invited to stay. Silence settled over the kitchen. Ethan slowly lowered the papers. You expected this. I shook my head. No. I prayed I'd never need any of it. He looked at his father, then back at me. For the first time since I'd known him, fear replaced certainty. Claire, his voice barely rose above a whisper. We didn't think. I know. You didn't think. I pointed toward the hallway. Your father claimed my home. Then I looked directly at Ethan. And you told me to hand him the keys. Neither of them denied it. They couldn't. Richard took one step forward, refusing to surrender what little confidence he had left. This is still just paperwork. Judges don't destroy families over misunderstandings. I met his eyes without flinching. No. They destroy lies. Then I pulled my phone back out. The recording doesn't destroy you. It proves exactly what happened. Richard's face hardened. Ethan's shoulders dropped. Dad, he whispered. What have we done? Richard said nothing. For the first time in his life. He didn't have an answer. I reached into my purse and removed my attorney's business card, placing it beside the folder. She told me not to call unless I was absolutely certain. I looked at both of them. I'm certain now. Ethan's breathing became uneven. Claire, please. I didn't start this. He swallowed hard. What do you want? I held his gaze for several long seconds. I wanted a husband who protected me. A tear finally escaped Ethan's eye. Instead of answering, I unlocked my phone. One tap would send the recording, every document, and everything that had happened that morning straight to my attorney. My thumb hovered over the send button. Then, the front doorbell rang. All three of us turned toward the entrance. I already knew exactly who was standing on the other side of that door. Ethan and Richard had no idea their worst day was only just beginning. The doorbell echoed through the house. Nobody moved. I already knew who was standing on the other side. Richard frowned. Who is that? Instead of answering, I walked to the front door and opened it. A courier stood on the porch holding a sealed legal envelope. Claire Bennett? Yes. He handed me the envelope, wished me a good afternoon, and walked away. I didn't even need to open it. My attorney had told me exactly when it would arrive. I calmly placed the envelope beside the blue folder on the kitchen island. Richard stared at it. What is that supposed to be? The beginning, I answered. Ethan looked from the envelope to my phone, then back at me. For the first time all morning, the confidence had completely disappeared from his face. His shoulders sagged, and his hands trembled as he realized everything they'd planned was slipping away. Claire, he whispered, his voice breaking. Please, don't send it. We can still fix this. I searched his face for the man I had married, the man who promised to protect me, the man who stood beside me at my parents' graves and swore this house would always honor their memory. He was gone. Standing before me was a man willing to give away my parents' life's work just to earn his father's approval. You had every chance to stop this, I said quietly. You could have spoken up when Richard claimed rooms. You could have reminded him this wasn't his home. Instead, you told me to hand him the keys. Neither of them could deny it. Richard stepped forward, refusing to admit defeat. You're the one tearing this family apart. I met his eyes without flinching. No. You did. The moment you walked into my parents' home believing you owned it. Richard opened his mouth again. Dad. Ethan's trembling voice stopped him. Please, just stop. Richard fell silent. For the first time since he'd walked through my front door, he had nothing left to say. I unlocked my phone. My thumb rested above the send button. This is your last chance, Ethan whispered. I looked at him one final time. I gave you dozens of chances. You just never realized they were chances. Then I pressed send. A soft notification echoed through the kitchen. The recording. The trust documents. My written statement. Everything was delivered directly to my attorney. Ethan closed his eyes. "It's over," he whispered. "Yes," I answered. "It is." Later that afternoon, my attorney called to confirm she had received everything. Within days, Ethan was formally served with legal separation papers. An official notice confirmed that neither he nor any member of his family had any legal claim to my parents' home. Richard called again and again. He left long voicemails. He sent messages insisting it had all been a misunderstanding. I never answered. Some choices speak louder than apologies ever can. 3 months later, the separation was finalized. Ethan signed every document. After his own attorney advised him there was no realistic path to challenge the trust, Richard never stepped inside my home again. The house he had already claimed as his office, the bedrooms he had assigned, the future he thought belonged to him, all of it disappeared the moment greed replaced respect. The last time I saw Ethan, he stood on my front porch holding a single box of his belongings. "I traded my marriage for my father's approval," he said quietly. "And in the end, I lost both." I nodded. "I hope one day you understand that love should never require betraying the person you promised to protect." He lowered his head and walked away without another word. Today, I still live in the home my parents built for me. Every morning, I drink my coffee on the back porch as the sun rises over the garden my mother loved. My father's workshop remains exactly as he left it. Every room reminds me not only of their sacrifice, but of the wisdom they left behind. The same keys Ethan demanded that afternoon are still resting on the same kitchen island. Sometimes I pick them up and remember the moment he said, "Hand my dad the keys." Back then, I thought he was asking me to surrender my home. Now I understand he was really asking me to surrender my self-respect. I refused. And that decision became the greatest inheritance my parents ever gave me. What would you have done if your spouse demanded you give away your family's legacy? Would you have walked away sooner or given them one last chance? Let me know in the comments. And if this story kept you with me until the very end, like and subscribe The Revenge Diaries. There's another unforgettable revenge story waiting for you next.